she did not flinch when he said it. That was the part she would remember longest. Not the words themselves, not the particular cruelty of them, but the fact that her hands remained perfectly still in her lap. The soup had already gone cold. She had not touched it. "You were never a handsome woman," Edmund said, from the other end of the table. He said it the way a man might comment on the weather. Observational, almost bored. "I want you to understand that I'm not saying it to wound you. It's simply something I've been meaning to address." Beside him, his sister Marian set down her wineglass, with a small, precise click. Celia did not look at Marian. She did not look at Edmund. She looked at the centerpiece. A low arrangement of dried lavender and white heather, which she herself had cut and bundled the previous autumn, in those first weeks when she had still believed that small domestic gestures might make something grow between them. "I see," she said. "Mother noticed it too, when we were first introduced. She thought perhaps you would improve with time." He was not shouting. He had never shouted, not in 2 years of marriage. Edmund Farrow was a man who delivered his cruelties the way a solicitor delivered bad news, methodically, without pleasure, as though emotion itself was a kind of vulgarity. Celia set her napkin beside her plate. She folded it, though it had never been unfolded. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me." She stood. She did not push the chair back too quickly. She did not let her hands tremble. She dipped her chin. Not quite a bow, not quite a curtsy, but something that belonged to neither category, something that was entirely her own. And she walked out of the dining room without looking back. She had married Edmund Farrow in the spring of 1887, in a church that smelled of beeswax and old stone, in a town she had never visited before the engagement was announced. Her father had arranged it. Her father, who loved her in his distant, ledger-minded way, had looked at the Farrow estate and seen security. He had looked at Edmund, 31 years old, steady employment in land management, a manor house with good bones, and seen a future for his second daughter that he himself could not provide. Celia had been 23. She had said yes because she did not know how to say anything else. She had known almost immediately that something was wrong, the way you know a door has been hung slightly off-level. Nothing dramatic, nothing you could point to, just a persistent, low-grade sense that things would never quite close right. Edmund was not violent. He was not a drunk. He worked hard and paid his bills and spoke to servants with a moderate courtesy that passed for good breeding in the county. But he had never once, in 2 years, asked Celia what she thought about anything. Not the redecorating of the East Parlor. Not the management of the household accounts, which she had quietly reorganized to save them £40 a year. Not her opinion of his business dealings, which she had read carefully in the documents he left on his desk, and which she had many opinions about, none of them invited. He had not married a wife. He had married a function. Marian was worse, in the particular way that people who consider themselves perceptive are always worse than those who don't. Edmund's sister had arrived 6 months into the marriage. Temporarily, she said, and had never left. She redecorated Celia's sitting room without asking. She redirected the housekeeper's instructions. She referred to Edmund's first meeting with Celia, at dinner parties, as the arrangement, in a tone that made the word sound like a minor clerical error, and Edmund said nothing. He never said anything. His silence was not the silence of a man who approved of his wife. Celia had come to understand that clearly enough. It was the silence of a man who simply did not see her. Until tonight, apparently, when he had seen enough to comment on her face. In her room, she did not weep. She had wept in the first months. She had wept quietly and thoroughly, and with the windows closed, and it had not changed anything, and eventually she had stopped, the way you stop knocking on a door you know is locked from the outside. She lit her own candle. The maid would have done it, but she did not ring, and she sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the traveling trunk in the corner. She had never unpacked it fully. That was the thing she had not admitted to herself until this moment. She had never unpacked it fully. There were books still wedged in the side pocket. There was a watercolor set that had never made it to the shelf. There was a letter from her friend Agnes in Edinburgh, which she had placed in the trunk to answer when she had a moment, and which she had never answered, and which was 2 years old now. She looked at the trunk for a long time. Then she stood, and she began to pack. She was methodical about it. There was something almost calming in the mechanics of it, folding, layering, tucking things into the right corners. Her 2 best dresses, her books, the watercolor set, the letters, the small tin box from the bottom drawer of her writing desk, which contained her own money, not Edmund's money, money she had saved from the household accounts over 2 years, by being careful, and clever and invisible, which amounted, in the end, to £63 and some change. She did not take the jewelry he had given her. It had not been given in affection. She did not feel entitled to it, and she did not want it. She did not write a note. She considered it, standing at the desk with pen in hand for several minutes, and then she set the pen down. She could not think of anything to say that Edmund would actually hear. He would read whatever she wrote and understand from it only what he already believed, that she was insufficient. She would not give him the satisfaction of explanation. At 2 o'clock in the morning, when the house was entirely quiet, she carried her trunk down the back stairs. The kitchen girl, Polly, was asleep by the banked fire. She woke when Celia set the trunk down, and her eyes went wide. "Mrs. Farrow, go back to sleep," Celia said quietly. "You didn't see me." Polly looked at the trunk, looked at Celia's face. She was 16 years old and had, Celia thought, a great deal of native intelligence that her position in life had not yet managed to stamp out. "The dog cart's in the far barn," Polly said. "The gray mare's easier than the bay." Celia looked at her for a moment. "Thank you, Polly. Good luck, ma'am." She was on the road before 3 o'clock, in the particular dark of early morning that feels like the whole world has turned its back and left you entirely to yourself. The gray mare moved steadily. Celia kept her eyes on the road ahead and did not look back at the house, which she could see for nearly a mile before the lane curved into the trees. She had told herself she would not look back. She did not look back. She had written to her friend Rowena, not to her parents, not to any of the Farrow connections. 3 weeks before, in a letter she had written 5 times before she found the version she could actually send. Rowena Slade was not married, which Celia had once pitied and now envied with a directness that surprised her. She kept a house in the village of Durness, on the northern coast of Scotland, where she ran a small subscription lending library that had no business surviving, and somehow did. The letter had said simply, "I may need to come to you. I am not certain yet. I wanted you to know beforehand." Rowena had written back, "My spare room has its own hearth. I've already cleared the shelves. Come whenever you need to. Come before you need to, if you can." Celia had not told Edmund she had corresponded with Rowena. She had not told him many things, by the end, not because she was secretive by nature, but because she had come to understand that the information she shared with him had nowhere to go. It did not interest him. It did not reach him. You cannot have a conversation with a wall, and eventually you stop trying. She caught the early mail coach at the junction 4 miles from the estate. She paid her own fare. She did not give her name. Durness was a day and a half of travel. 2 coaches, a hired cart from Tongue, and finally a walk of nearly 2 miles, along a coastal path with her trunk on a borrowed barrow, which she pulled herself because she had not wanted to ask for help, and because the physical difficulty of it felt obscurely like something she needed. Rowena was standing at the gate when she arrived, as though she had known exactly when to come out. She said nothing. She took one side of the barrow and helped pull it through the gate and up the path to the front door, and only when they were inside, with the door closed and the fire lit, did she put her arms around Celia and hold on. Celia stood in that embrace and felt something that was not quite relief and not quite grief, but was something in between, a long, slow unlocking of tension she had held so continuously, she had stopped being aware she was holding it. "I left before sunrise," Celia said into Rowena's shoulder. "I know," Rowena said. "That's the right time to leave." She slept for 11 hours. She woke to the sound of the sea and a smell of bread from the kitchen below, and for one disoriented moment, she had no idea where she was. Only that the bed was narrow, and the sheets were cold, and the ceiling was low, and she was, for the first time in 2 years, alone in a room that belonged entirely to herself. She lay there for a long time. Then she got up and went downstairs and ate 2 full plates of breakfast, and helped Rowena sort a delivery of new books, and did not think about Edmund Farrow at all for nearly 4 hours, which was the longest she had gone without thinking about him since the marriage. And she noted the fact the way you note the absence of a sound you had stopped being able to hear. The letter arrived 12 days later. It was not from Edmund. It was from a firm of solicitors in Edinburgh named Galt and Pemberton, and it was written in the careful, impersonal language of the law, which has the particular quality of being entirely clear while also being entirely opaque. The substance of it, as Celia read it twice at the kitchen table, was this. Her father had died 4 months ago. She had known that. She had attended the funeral, and had left, in a will codicil she had not previously been informed of, a parcel of property in the county of Sutherland. The property was a small, solid-built house on 11 acres of good coastal land, which had belonged to her mother's family, and which her father had held in trust for her. Not for the Farrow estate, not for Edmund. For Celia, in her own name, under the Married Women's Property Act of 1882, which had the useful quality of meaning that her husband could not touch it. She read the letter a third time. Then she looked out the window at the sea. Then she set the letter down and pressed both hands flat against the kitchen table and said, "To nobody." Well, Rowena came in from the library with a stack of catalogs and stopped when she saw Celia's face. "What is it?" "I appear," Celia said carefully, "to own a house." She did not think about returning. That was what she told herself. She had £63, a borrowed room, and a friend who did not require her to justify her own existence. She had a house that was legally hers. She did not need Edmund Farrow. She had, in point of fact, never needed Edmund Farrow. She had simply been told she did, by people who had not asked her opinion. But she thought about him. She thought about the specific way his face closed when he was wrong and would not admit it. She thought about the evenings she had spent across the dinner table from him, reading his face for some sign of the man she had hoped might be there. Some evidence of depth or feeling, or ordinary human longing. She thought about the conversation they had never managed to have. She thought about the fact that she had spent 2 years trying to make something out of an arrangement that had been designed, from the beginning, with her own needs nowhere in the plans. She thought about what he had said at dinner. She thought about it, and then she thought. He was afraid. It arrived not as forgiveness. She was not ready for that, and was not certain she would ever be. But as understanding, which is a different thing and colder. Edmund had looked at his wife and seen something he did not know what to do with. A woman who was more capable than he had anticipated, who had reorganized the accounts without being asked, who had managed the household with a quiet competence that had made him feel, she suspected, not grateful but unnecessary. And so he had reached for the one thing he could say that she could not argue with, the one category in which he still felt confident of his assessment. He had called her ugly because he did not know how to say that he was afraid of her. It did not make it right. It made it, slightly, explicable. Edmund arrived on a Wednesday. He had taken the train to Lairg and hired a horse from there, which was, she would later learn, not something Edmund had done before. He preferred to have things arranged for him, and which had taken him 2 false starts, and a great deal of inconvenience. He arrived at Rowena's gate looking, for the first time in Celia's experience, genuinely disheveled. His hat was wrong. He had mud on one boot and not the other. She saw him from the upstairs window before he knocked. She stood there and looked at him for a moment. This man she had married, who had stood at the end of the dinner table and told her she was not handsome, who had sat silent for 2 years, while his sister rearranged her sitting room and spoke of her marriage as an administrative event. She looked at him and felt. Not love, not yet, perhaps not ever in the way she had once imagined love might feel, but something curious and careful, a question she had not finished asking. She went downstairs and opened the door herself. He stood there with his hat in his hands. He was not a man who was practiced at this, at standing in front of someone, holding nothing, with his face visible. It looked like it cost him something. "Celia," he said. "Edmund." A long pause. Behind her she could hear Rowena very quietly closing the library door. "I would like to speak with you," he said. "If you're willing." "I am not coming back," she said. "Not an accusation. A fact, stated cleanly. I want you to understand that before we begin." He absorbed that. He did not argue with it, which surprised her. "I understand," he said. She stepped aside and let him in. They sat at Rowena's kitchen table because there was nowhere else to sit that was not Rowena's parlor, which felt too formal, or Rowena's library, which felt too pointed. Rowena herself had gone for a walk along the cliff path with great and obvious tact. Edmund held his cup of tea in both hands. He had not touched it. "Marian is leaving," he said finally. "She has a position in Bath. She arranged it herself." I did not know she intended to." Celia waited. "I should have asked her to leave," he said. "That is, I want to be exact about this. I should have asked her to leave a year ago. I did not. I cannot give you an explanation for that I find satisfactory, which is to say that the only explanation I have is cowardice, and I know that is not a sufficient reason." Celia looked at him. She had never heard Edmund use the word cowardice in relation to himself. She had not been certain he possessed the self-awareness to reach it. "What she said to you," he continued, "at table, in company about your management of the household, and before that, what I said." He stopped. His jaw worked. "What I said." "In the dining room, you said I was not handsome," Celia said. She said it the same way he had, evenly, without drama. She wanted him to hear it. "Yes." He set the cup down. He looked at it. "I said it to wound you. I told myself otherwise at the time, but I said it because I had felt for some time that you." He stopped again. "Tried a entry. The accounts," he said. "What you did with the accounts. I saved us £40. I know. I found the ledger. I traced it back." He paused. "I should have thanked you. I should have thanked you the day I found it, And I did not, because he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Celia, watching his face, understood what the sentence contained. Because I was ashamed that you had done it and I had not thought to. You felt unnecessary, she said. He looked up at her. Something shifted in his expression. Something raw and somewhat frightened. Yes, he said. She looked at him for a long time. Outside, the wind was coming in off the coast, and she could hear it moving against the windows. I have a house, she said, in Sutherland. My mother's family's house. It is mine legally, in my own name. I know, the solicitors. I am going to live in it, she said. I am going to go there and to determine what it needs and make it habitable and live in it, and I am going to decide, once I have done that, what I want to do next. She paused. You may write to me. I will not promise to answer quickly, but I will answer. He was quiet for a moment. And what would writing look like? What should I say? She almost smiled. It was, she thought, the first honest question he had ever asked her. What should I say? After 2 years of dinners where he had said whatever he wished, or nothing at all, here he was asking. Tell me what you think about, she said. Not the estate, not the accounts, what you actually think about, what troubles you, what you are uncertain of. She folded her hands on the table. I have been married to you for 2 years, and I do not know if you have ever been uncertain about anything. Tell me something true. He sat with that. She did not rush him. I am uncertain, he said slowly, about almost everything. I simply have no practice in saying so. Then practice, she said. In the letters. Start there. The house in Sutherland was smaller than she had imagined. Stone walls, a low ceiling in the main room, 4 windows that looked out on the water, and a garden that had gone entirely wild with several good years of neglect. She had expected to find it sad, and she found instead that she loved it immediately, in the uncomplicated way you can love something that makes no demands on you. She spent the first 2 weeks fixing the kitchen window, which did not close properly, and pulling up the worst of the garden overgrowth, and buying a second good chair for the sitting room, because she intended to have visitors, and she intended to be ready for them. Rowena came for 3 days in November, and they stayed up too late and talked about everything and nothing, and Celia slept, again, with the sound of the sea underneath her, and the low ceiling above and the particular feeling of being entirely correctly placed. Edmund's first letter arrived in October. It was stiff and somewhat formal, which she had expected. He told her the state of the East Field. He mentioned that Polly had been given a small raise. He asked, at the end, in a sentence that had clearly been written and rewritten, I find I have no practice at this, as I told you. But I have been thinking about what you said, about the things that trouble me. I think it troubles me most that I spent 2 years not seeing you. I am not certain I know how to do it differently, but I would like to try. She read the letter 3 times. Then she went and sat in the good chair by the window and looked at the water for a while. Then she wrote back. A full page, and then another. She told him about the kitchen window. She told him about the garden. She told him carefully, and without softening it, what the first weeks of the marriage had felt like, the particular loneliness of being invisible to someone who shared your table. She did not promise him anything. She was not ready to promise him anything. But she was, for the first time, speaking honestly to him, across the distance, without needing him to receive it well. She was simply saying it, the way you say something true into the open air, and letting him decide what to do with it. She sealed the letter. She walked to the post herself. On the way back, she stopped at the top of the cliff path and stood there for a moment with the wind in her face and the water spread out below her, enormous, indifferent, endlessly moving, and she thought, I am 25 years old and I own 11 acres of this coast, and I know what I am worth. Not what Edmund thought she was worth, not what Marion thought, not what her father had calculated when he arranged the match, looking at the ledger columns of security versus suitability. What she was worth. She stood there until she was cold, and then she walked home.